Hadrian Windrider stood in the center of the tribunal ring on Frost Moon 19, 1428, with snow lifting off the riverbank in thin white sheets, and two delegations staring at her as if one wrong word could reopen a war. The North March wolves held the eastern rail under steel-gray cloaks. Her own border pack filled the western side, faces she had known since childhood, faces that had watched her stand alone in 1423 when no clan stepped forward at her pairing right. Captain Ivo Kestrel stood near the wardens, wrists bound in ironwood, still carrying the stubborn set of a man who believed he could talk his way back into command. She heard her own breathing in the silence and waited for the first stone to fly, because that was how memory taught her public attention worked. Zephyr Ashford, Alpha King of the North March, watched from the neutral dais with his jaw locked and a blood-stiff bandage hidden under the high collar of his travel leathers. He had come into her village 7 days earlier under a neutral banner and a safe conduct writ, and she had brought him inside when every warden told her to leave him on the road. Now the same choice had pulled her here, where testimony could clear her name or bury it permanently. The tribunal clerk asked for final declarations. Hadrian answered first, voice rough from cold and sleepless nights, naming each broken seal on the evidence caravan and each forged ledger entry that turned raid losses into private coin. She said Ivo had ordered the sabotage. She said he profited from panic. She said 3 raids in 8 weeks had not been random border rage, and the sentence landed like flint in dry grass. Ivo lunged into his denial, calling her oath false, calling her disloyal, calling her the same useless daughter nobody claimed in 1423. The old shame struck like a fist to the ribs, immediate and familiar, yet this time she did not fold around it. She saw Mara Windrider, her elder sister and village reeve, step forward from the western rail and raise her hand for witness right. Mara's voice trembled once, steadied, then confirmed Hadrian's chain of evidence and confessed her own silence 5 years ago. She said she had failed her sister in public once and would not fail her again. The ring shifted. The tribunal judges leaned in. Zephyr moved before anyone asked him to, descended from the dais, and invoked royal arrest authority under the emergency charter both delegations had signed on Frost Moon 12. He did it on neutral ground, with every political cost visible in the faces of his own advisors. Then he turned to Hadrian, in full witness of both pacts, and claimed her as his chosen mate and future queen consort with an oath that could not be recalled without breaking throne law. The snow kept falling, and every sound in the world seemed to go thin. To understand how a border apothecary became the woman the Alpha King claimed before 2 hostile pacts, the story had to go back to the day she learned what public rejection felt like when it had witnesses. In 1423, Hadrian stood in a right circle with ash painted on her palms, waiting for one of the nearby clans to accept the pairing petition her mother had arranged before she died. She was young enough to believe process still protected people. She was old enough to understand what silence meant when elders avoided her eyes. One clan delegate looked at her, looked at Mara beside the reeve chair, and passed without speaking. The second delegate offered a polite refusal. The third said her bloodline carried no strategic value, and the word spread through the crowd faster than winter smoke. Nobody assaulted her. Nobody needed to. The right closed without a claim, and law treated the outcome as ordinary administration. She walked out as an unpaired daughter with no household sponsor and no guaranteed protection rank. Mara reached toward her once, then withdrew when the elders called the next petition. That small movement, hand forward then gone, stayed in Hadrian longer than the refusals themselves. She learned to keep her head down in crowded places, learned to avoid center spaces, learned to never mistake visibility for belonging. Eldavos took her in that winter and gave her a room above the inn where the rafters leaked in thaw season and the floorboards sang at night. Elda had no taste for pity, only routines. She set Hadrian to inventory herbs, sweep the lower hall, and patch travel cloaks for extra coin. When fever seasons hit, Elda sent her to old healer Bran with satchels and told her to watch everything. Skill came the way survival came in border villages, one practical task at a time. By 1428, she could set a fracture splint in under 5 minutes, stitch a deep shoulder laceration in poor light, and identify counterfeit tinctures by smell alone. Late winter of 1428 pushed the village harder than any season Hadrian remembered. 3 cross-border raids struck in 8 weeks, each one fast, each one aimed at caravan stores, each one leaving just enough bodies to keep anger hot and facts blurry. Captain Ivo Kestrel responded with emergency rule, doubled curfew patrols, and turned the South Gate checkpoint into a choke point that made every traveler feel suspect. He had lost wardens to raids years earlier, and grief had hardened into a simple logic: attack first so nobody attacked you second. Mara, serving as acting village reeve, tried to balance food ledgers, burial requests, and Ivo's demands for broader arrest powers. She did the work well, which was part of the problem, since competence made people overlook what she agreed to under pressure. Hadrian saw her sister less as family than as an office she had to request access to. Formal messages went through runners. Personal conversations shrank to short exchanges near storerooms. The old wound between them did not bleed openly, yet it shaped every room they shared. On Frost Moon 12, 1428, a lone rider approached under a neutral banner at midday, white cloth high on a spear in full sight of the gate tower. He carried a sealed safe conduct writ valid for 7 days, naming inspection rights for the border road and attendance at a ceasefire tribunal proposal. The writ bore North March sigils and the emergency charter language both packs had negotiated by messenger after the third raid. Hadrian only learned those details later. At the gate, she saw a man in plain travel leathers, posture disciplined, gaze controlled, one hand pressed too often to his side, while the high collar at his throat sat oddly tight, as if it hid fresh wrapping. Ivo met him with 20 wardens and all the ceremony of a challenge. He read the writ, accepted entry under law, and immediately denied the rider lodging inside the warden barracks, denied access to the infirmary, and announced that neutral status did not oblige hospitality. The crowd approved with cold, sharp noises. Hadrian watched the rider step down from his horse without a flinch, and understood from the way he favored his right leg that he had taken an ambush wound before arriving. Blood had soaked through linen under the leather seam. Hadrian crossed the square before she finished deciding to move. She said the law protected transit and hearing attendants, and village custom required care for the injured under roof if space existed. Ivo told her to stand down. She said she had beds and sterile bandage rolls at Elda's inn. Ivo called her reckless. The rider looked at her once, expression unreadable, and said he would accept treatment from the apothecary if offered formally. His voice carried command without volume, and the square fell quiet in the way crowds did around rank, even when rank wore dust and plain leather. She had no rank to shield her. She also had no patience for letting a man bleed in public to satisfy fear. Hadrian repeated the offer, named the inn, and waited. The rider inclined his head in acknowledgement, as if honoring a treaty article instead of her personal risk. He followed her through the market lane while eyes tracked every step. By nightfall, half the village said she had invited a northern spy into their center. The other half said she had finally revealed where her loyalties sat. Inside Elda's back room, once coat and shirt came off, the concealment gave way to fact. Hadrian cut away the tight collar wrap and found the hidden bandage running from his lower ribs toward his shoulder, soaked through where he had tied it one-handed to keep anyone at the gate from seeing how bad it was. A deep slash angled under the ribs, partially closed with field stitches done in motion. He had cleaned it, packed it, and ridden anyway. His restraint felt less heroic than stubborn, the kind that kept breathing regular while pain ate through concentration. Hadrian asked his name for charting. He said, "Zephyr Ashford." She repeated it silently, caught the significance a second late, and looked up to see whether he expected ceremony now that the title had landed between them. He did not ask for kneeling. He asked for needle thread and tincture strength. She worked while Elda held basin and lint rolls, and Zephyr answered medical questions in clipped phrases, no more and no less. The wound had been reopened during a roadside ambush 2 hours north of the village, likely by men trying to provoke a retaliation claim. Hadrian sterilized, debrided, and restitched while he stayed still enough to make precision possible. She noticed one brief tremor when she irrigated near the deepest tear. He noticed that she noticed, and his mouth flattened with contained annoyance. She told him he would run fever overnight and must not ride for at least 1 day. He said his schedule did not allow 1 day. She said tissue did not negotiate with schedules. Elda laughed once under her breath and left broth by the bedside. He accepted those instructions after a pause that felt like a private concession, and Hadrian filed the reaction under practical victory, not personal meaning. Men in command always disliked being managed by body limits. Kings likely disliked it more. By dawn, rumors had outrun facts. Evo posted 2 wardens outside the inn under pretext of public safety, and every patient who came for salves had an opinion on treason. Mara arrived mid-morning with Reeve authority and a face closed tight as winter bark. She asked Hadrian in private what she thought she was doing. Hadrian answered that she was keeping lawful passage from turning into a murder in slow motion. Mara said law and survival were no longer separate at the border. Hadrian heard the plea under the reprimand and answered with the same bluntness she reserved for infected wounds. If survival required breaking writ law, then they had already lost what they claimed to defend. Mara had no easy reply. She left with orders to maintain watch and report all contacts. The official language sounded neutral. The eyes of the wardens outside did not. Hadrian carried fresh bandages upstairs and found Zephyr reviewing maps on the bedside table, one hand pressing the stitched side as if he could flatten pain into obedience. She changed the dressing and caught a line of scar tissue across his shoulder blade, old and jagged, evidence of a strike from someone close enough to aim for a kill. He noticed her looking and pulled his shirt on before she finished cleaning blood from her fingers. The next 2 days built a pattern that unsettled her precisely because it looked like indifference from the outside. Zephyr attended emergency charter meetings with Mara and Ivo, spoke little, asked exact questions about raid timing, and requested access to caravan manifests from the last 8 weeks. He did not seek Hadrian out in public. He did not thank her in front of the council. She translated the distance as expected: hierarchy, king, and apothecary, returning to proper stations once stitches held. The audience of the village saw something else. They saw the Alpha King pause at the inn threshold every evening and ask Elda, not a servant, whether the apothecary had eaten. They saw him redirect 2 of his own guards to shadow her route when she made night visits to fever cottages. They saw him cut off a merchant who called her reckless in the market. 1 sentence and a look, enough to make the man lower his voice for the rest of the day. Hadrian interpreted each act as tactical management around a useful witness. The interpretation: let her sleep. On Frost Moon 15, a supply cart arrived from the eastern ridge with a driver Hadrian recognized: Tobin Reeve, Mara's husband's cousin and the man who had laughed loudest at her right in 1423. He delivered crates marked tribunal records and requested storage in the Warden Depot. Hadrian happened to be there collecting disinfectant spirits and saw Ivo meet Tobin alone near the back gate. A ledger packet changed hands, wrapped in oilskin with no official seal. Ivo slid it into his coat and dismissed the guards from earshot. She told herself she might have misread an ordinary transfer. Her body disagreed. The same physical warning she trusted with poisoning cases rose in her chest, a tightness that meant facts were about to break badly. That evening, she reported the exchange to Mara and asked for chain of custody review on all evidence bound for the proposed tribunal. Mara hesitated long enough to expose the pressure she was under. Ivo had become the village's voice of safety, and any challenge to him looked like weakness while raid fear stayed high. Mara promised to look quietly. Quietly meant slowly, and Frost Moon days were moving fast. Zephyr came to the inn after Nightbell for dressing change and found Hadrian sharper than usual, hands moving with clipped speed. He asked what had happened. She gave him the short version, framing suspicion, not accusation. He listened without interruption, then asked for names, locations, and exact hour. She gave all three. He said he would request formal audit authority at morning council. She answered that Evo would block it. Zephyr's expression did not shift, yet a specific stillness entered him, one she had begun to associate with decisions already made. At council, Ivo rejected the audit request before Mara finished reading it, cited emergency burden, and moved to postpone tribunal preparation until further security sweeps. Postponement would expire Zephyr's 7-day safe conduct and force his departure without hearing. Hadrian watched Zephyr decline the argument trap and ask one neutral question: who held the depot keys overnight? Evo answered too quickly, said only wardens had access. Hadrian saw Mara glance toward Tobin at the rear bench, then back to her notes, and the loop tightened another turn. That night, the evidence caravan burned half a mile south of the river crossing. Flames took 3 wagons and 2 draft teams before bucket lines controlled it. Ivo announced arson by northern infiltrators within minutes, named retaliatory patrol plans by dawn, and positioned himself as the only officer willing to defend the village. Hadrian reached the site with triage satchel and found broken seals lying in slush before the burn line, as if someone had opened crates first and torched the remains second. She pocketed one metal seal ring stamped with a Warden Quartermaster mark. Zephyr arrived during mop-up, face lit orange by fire and anger he kept under iron control. He asked for casualty count, then scanned the debris field without speaking. His gaze stopped at Hadrian's closed fist, where the seal ring pressed into her palm. He stepped near enough that only she heard him ask what she had found. She showed him. He did not touch the ring, simply nodded once, and placed 2 royal guards at her shoulder before turning toward Ivo. Ivo objected publicly to royal guards on village soil. Zephyr answered that the emergency charter signed on Frost Moon 12 allowed delegated protective custody for key witnesses tied to tribunal evidence. It was the first time Hadrian heard him use king's authority in full public cadence, and the crowd reacted with murmurs that ran from fear to resentment. She misread the protection instantly as damage control for his own political position, because accepting any personal motive would have reopened things she had trained herself to keep closed. On Frost Moon 17, with safe conduct near expiry, Mara finally brought Hadrian the quiet review she had promised. 2 depot logs had been altered. Tobin's signature appeared on shipments he never physically loaded. A duplicate key request bore Evo's mark and a forged Reeve countersign. Mara admitted she had ignored early inconsistencies because she needed Ivo cooperative during emergency rule. Saying it aloud cost her. Hadrian could see that in the way Mara held the desk edge until her knuckles blanched. Hadrian did not forgive her in that moment. She did something harder. She asked for certified copies and prepared a witness statement that included Mara's delay. Mara stared, hurt and relieved at once, then offered Reeve's seal for legal weight. Hadrian accepted. The act resolved one private hesitation that had defined her since 1423. She had been unable to trust herself in public conflict with family. Certified testimony made truth larger than blood and smaller than revenge, which was exactly what the tribunal required. Ivo moved first when he sensed exposure. He filed formal treason notice against Hadrian for collusion with North March interests and ordered confinement pending hearing. Wardens arrived at Elda's Inn after dusk with writ in hand. Hadrian read the charge twice, felt the old panic rise, and chose motion over fear. She walked outside before they could drag her, handed Elda a sealed packet for Mara, and requested tribunal transfer under witness protection clause. Zephyr's guards stepped from shadow and blocked the warden captain from shackling her. Zephyr himself appeared at the end of the lane, coat unfastened, wound pulling his stride off-center despite his effort to hide it. He addressed the wardens by charter article and demanded immediate transfer to neutral holding pending Frost Moon 19 hearing. Evo arrived moments later and accused him of manufacturing a crisis to seize border control. Zephyr answered with 4 words: "Produce uncontaminated evidence now." Evo could not. The wardens hesitated long enough for legal procedure to lock in, and Hadrian was escorted to neutral quarters inside the old granary. In neutral holding, she slept little. Each creak of beams sounded like approaching judgment. Elda brought broth at dawn and smuggled in clean linen with muttered curses for every man who mistook cruelty for governance. Mara came near noon, dismissed guards under Reeve privilege, and finally said what 5 years had stored inside her chest. She told Hadrian she had stayed silent in 1423 because challenging elders then would have cost her Reeve succession, and she believed securing office would let her protect her sister later. Later kept moving. The silence became habit. Hadrian listened without absolution ready in her hands. She asked one question, when Ivo started turning raids into profit. Why did you still back him? Mara answered that she did not see profit at first, only a commander who made frightened people feel managed, and by the time she recognized the ledger pattern, she feared public fracture more than private guilt. Hadrian gave a tired nod and said public fracture had already happened in 1423. It simply happened to one girl, so nobody named it as fracture. Mara cried quietly, then promised to testify to every delayed report and every pressured signature. On Frost Moon 18, Zephyr requested private medical assessment before tribunal and insisted the evaluation occur with independent witness. Hadrian was assigned by charter since she had treated the original wound. In a storage chamber turned clinic, she removed the bandage and found fresh bleeding along the lower stitch line. He had reopened it while intervening at the inn arrest. She told him if he entered tribunal in current state, he risked collapse under stress. He said collapsing would be inconvenient. She snapped that kings were not exempt from tissue failure, and he surprised her with a brief, tired smile that vanished almost immediately. As she worked, he asked whether she regretted taking him inside on Frost Moon 12. She answered with the truth she used when fear made lying tempting. No, and I disliked what it cost before I saw what it changed. He watched her tie off the final knot and spoke with unusual softness. If you had left me outside, I would still have called the tribunal, but I would not have known whom to trust at the border. The sentence slipped under her defenses before she could classify it. She looked up and found his gaze direct, unarmored for one heartbeat, then shielded again. That was the window she could not explain away. She replayed every clipped answer, every controlled silence, every meeting where he held himself rigid and distant, and she finally recognized a pattern she had missed. He had been containing pain and exposure, not dismissing her. His distance had never been indifference, only discipline wrapped around vulnerability he treated as state risk. She saw it most clearly when he stood to leave and had to brace one hand on the table because pain flashed across his face faster than command could hide it. The Alpha King who made rooms fall silent was also a man stitched together by obligation and old betrayal scars, still choosing to stand where everyone could strike. Her interpretation of him began to shift, slow but irreversible. The critical revelation came to him the same night, and it arrived with none of the ceremony he associated with state decisions. Zephyr reviewed tribunal briefs alone while the bandage pulled tight across his side, and remembered the apothecary at the gate saying law still mattered when fear wanted exceptions. He had spent years reading loyalty through strategy, counting outcomes, pricing every alliance against risk. Hadrian kept choosing costly honesty even when it stripped her of cover. In that clarity, he recognized what his advisors had missed. The bond he felt was real, and honoring it would demand public claim at the precise moment politics would punish it. By morning of Frost Moon 19, neutral ground had become a powder line. If Ivo proved right, Zephyr would leave with failed ceasefire and a compromised border. If Hadrian failed under questioning, treason charge would stand and her life would narrow to whatever mercy emergency courts gave rejected daughters. She entered the tribunal ring with Mara's sealed confession, depot log copies, broken seal ring, and a mind clear from exhaustion past panic. Fear still lived in her body, yet it no longer dictated action. The hearing opened with procedural oaths and a challenge from Evo's counsel, questioning neutral jurisdiction over village officers. Zephyr's legal advisor presented the emergency charter signed on Frost Moon 12 by both delegations, granting temporary cross-pack authority for raids tied to tribunal evidence. Jurisdiction held. Ivo shifted to character attack, painting Hadrian as resentful after 1423 rejection and eager for northern favor. The strategy cut exactly where old wounds sat. Hadrian felt the sting and answered with documents before emotion, establishing timing, signatures, and access routes to the sabotaged caravan. Mara testified next. She confessed delaying Hadrian's early warning and admitted fear of political collapse had made her complicit by silence. Gasps moved through the western rail as villagers watched their reeve indict her own judgment in open court. Ivo called Mara unstable under family pressure. Mara held his stare and replied that she had accepted pressure from him for months and that stability without integrity was simply managed decay. The judges requested corroboration. Elda Voss stepped forward with in-log entries and delivery times that matched Hadrian's timeline to the minute. Ivo tried one final reversal by producing a witness who claimed northern raiders bought depot access directly from Tobin without his knowledge. The witness, a warden sergeant, repeated details too cleanly and stumbled when asked which gate pass color was active on Frost Moon 15. Hadrian caught the mismatch first and requested to cross-question. She asked who issued his patrol boots after the last resupply. He said Quartermaster Team B records showed Team B had been reassigned 6 days earlier, making his stated duty post impossible. The lie collapsed under logistics. With deadlock broken, Zephyr rose and exercised royal arrest authority under the charter, naming Ivo as principal conspirator in evidence sabotage and raid profiteering pending full border court trial. He did it knowing his counsel had urged delay until he returned to North March soil, delay that would preserve diplomatic cover. Immediate arrest on neutral ground exposed him to accusations of overreach from both sides. He accepted that cost in front of everyone, and the room understood the choice exactly, because it was expensive. Ivo fought the restraints and shouted that kings used village girls as trophies. The insult echoed against tribunal boards, then died when Zephyr descended from the dais and faced the ring without advisors between him and the crowd. Hadrian expected another legal statement. He gave an oath instead, voice carrying over snow and river wind. He said he recognized Hadrian Windrider as his chosen mate by bond and by will, that he claimed her publicly before both delegations, and that he offered no hidden contract, only full standing beside him with witness rights and crown obligations. The old wound from 1423 met its mirror image in that moment. Same public scale, opposite meaning. Hadrian felt the crowd's attention hit her shoulders and waited for disbelief. What came first was memory, the circle 5 years earlier, the absence where a claim should have been. What came second was choice, present and unmistakable. A claim could still become a cage if she accepted it from fear. She stepped into the ring beside Zephyr and spoke clearly so every rail heard. She accepted him with full knowledge of the cost, including leaving the village where pain had taught her and where duty still needed witnesses. That answer mattered as much as his oath. It resolved the final hesitation between them, since Zephyr had been unable to offer his bond without risking that rank would swallow her agency. Her explicit acceptance made partnership possible where dependency had been the old pattern. Mara bowed her head, not to the king, to her sister. Elda wiped her eyes with the back of her hand and muttered approval loud enough for half the front rail to hear. The tribunal clerk recorded the claim and acceptance in both delegations' registers, making it legally and politically irreversible. Evo was removed under guard before sunset and transferred to an interior garrison pending border court trial, stripped of village command. The same wardens who once followed him out of fear escorted him south in silence. Tobin was detained for aiding sabotage and barred from logistics duties. Emergency rule ended with immediate effect. Mara retained Reeve office under probation oversight from rotating border judges, an arrangement she accepted without protest because authority gained by avoidance had already cost enough. The ceasefire did not become peace overnight. Patrol routes still crossed in wary arcs, and every unexplained fire drew suspicion first, inquiry second. Yet the border court established after the tribunal gave both packs a place where disputes could be heard before retaliation hardened into blood debt. Judges rotated by charter, one from each side plus a neutral clerk, exactly the simplification frontier governance needed to function in a winter of low trust. Hadrian served as treaty witness for initial hearings, and her meticulous records prevented early procedural collapses. Through late frost moon and into thaw, Zephyr remained in the village longer than his advisors liked. Partly for negotiations, partly because his wound demanded monitored recovery he could no longer pretend away. Hadrian handled dressing changes in a small room above Elda's kitchen, while council messengers piled requests outside. Their conversations stayed sparse, practical first. Over days, practical widened. He asked what she had wanted before 1423 made wanting feel dangerous. She answered after a long pause, a place where doing right did not require permission from men afraid of losing status. He told her about the betrayal that had built his armor, a former betrothed from a high house who sold troop routes to rivals during a succession challenge, costing him 2 cousins and nearly the throne. The wound had taught him that attachment could be weaponized faster than any blade. He had chosen discipline over closeness and ruled effectively, yet loneliness had become governance background noise. Hadrian listened without trying to fix him, and that response landed deeper than reassurance would have. Being seen without being managed was rare in both their worlds. When spring roads opened, the question of relocation became immediate. The North March capital sat 46 miles from the border village, close enough for regular oversight, far enough that leaving still felt like crossing a life boundary. Zephyr offered residence and title as queen consort, then added terms himself before she asked: independent apothecary authority within the palace infirmary, witness seat at border court sessions, and unrestricted travel to Elda's inn and Mara's office during non-war months. He spoke in declarative cadence, then paused and asked if the terms matched her agency rather than the crown's convenience. Hadrian took a day to answer. She walked every street where her name had once meant refusal, from Right Circle to Depot Lane to the inn steps where Elda still banged pots like battle drums. She visited Mara at the Reeve Hall and found her sister reviewing new transparency rules for depot access. Mara apologized again, this time without pleading tone, and handed Hadrian a copy of the first border court order that cited her testimony as precedent. The document did what apologies could not. It showed changed behavior. At dusk, Hadrian returned to the riverbank where the tribunal ring had stood and looked at melting snow revealing old, trampled tracks. She understood she no longer needed the village to declare her worth in order to feel it. That realization made choice cleaner. She accepted relocation to the capital, not as escape from pain, and not as reward for survival, as deliberate movement toward a life where her work and voice had structural weight. She informed Zephyr in one sentence. He answered with one of his own, I will build policy to match that sentence. Spring 1429 saw their formal entry into the North March capital under banners that carried both throne insignia and border court seal. Crowds lined the approach, curious, skeptical, celebratory by turns. Hadrian wore no elaborate display beyond a winter blue cloak clasped at the throat and the tribunal witness ring on her hand. Zephyr rode beside her, still reserved in public, though she now recognized the small signals beneath restraint. The glance to confirm she was warm enough, the adjusted pace when stares aggravated old scar tissue, the quiet check that her satchel still held the tinctures she insisted on carrying herself. Court resistance emerged exactly where expected, high houses questioning a queen consort from rejected border stock. Zephyr answered once in council and never again, citing tribunal record, charter law, and his sovereign claim. The refusal to relitigate her standing changed court behavior faster than argument would have. Hadrian changed it further by competence no one could dismiss. She reorganized infirmary inventory, uncovered 2 procurement graft schemes in her first month, and redirected savings to border clinic grants that reduced emergency mortality in 3 outlying settlements before summer solstice. She continued to travel the 46 miles back to the village each court cycle, serving as treaty witness and visiting Elda, who treated palace stories as entertainment secondary to whether Hadrian was eating enough. Mara met her at hearings with reports prepared, no corners cut, no signatures hidden. Their relationship rebuilt through repeated acts instead of emotional speeches. Trust returned in increments, like spring thaw that looked static day to day, until one morning the river actually moved. Zephyr's mask did not vanish after claiming. It became more selective. In council, he stayed concise, immovable when needed. In private, he allowed the parts of himself shaped by loss to surface without apology, and Hadrian met those moments with the same moral steadiness that had first caught his attention at the gate. They fought sometimes over risk thresholds, over his instinct to absorb danger alone, over her habit of stepping into conflict before calling for backup. The fights ended with revised protocols, not silent resentment, which was a form of intimacy both had to learn deliberately. On the first anniversary of the Frost Moon Tribunal, they returned to the border village without procession and stood with Elda and Mara at the old Rite Circle from 1423. Snow fell again, lighter this time. Hadrian placed a small brass plaque near the stone ring, inscribed with new village rule language requiring witness protection at all public rites and appeal rights for any unclaimed petitioner. The rule could not erase what happened to her. It could keep that specific humiliation from being policy again. Mara read the text aloud to gathered families and signed it as Reeve. Elda brought mulled broth in a dented kettle and told everyone they could discuss governance after they drank something hot. Zephyr stood slightly behind Hadrian, letting the moment belong to her village, then stepped forward only when she reached for his hand. The gesture was simple, ordinary, yet it carried the full arc of what had changed, from a woman taught she was unclaimable to a woman choosing in public, repeatedly, with eyes open. By the time thaw deepened into late spring, the ceasefire held across the frontier. Raids dropped, disputes moved into court channels, and the first joint road repair crews worked stretches that had been contested for years. Ivo remained in interior garrison awaiting sentence under the same legal framework he once manipulated. His removal closed one cycle. The institutions built after him opened another. Hadrian's wound from 1423 no longer governed her decisions, because the public space that once marked her exclusion now held her testimony, her claim, and her law. At night in the capital, when council fires burned low and the corridors finally quieted, Hadrian still caught herself listening for the old cadence of danger, the approach of footsteps that meant accusation. Some nights the body remembered before the mind intervened. Zephyr learned that rhythm and met it without questions she could not answer at midnight. He would place warm tea near her elbow, review next day's court docket in companionable silence, and wait until her breathing eased. Protection looked like that more often than it looked like battle stances. She had treated him like a lawful visitor when nobody else in the village would risk that courtesy. He had claimed her in public when the political cost made retreat easier. Each act forced the next, and each next act remade the world around them in increments concrete enough to count. 7 days of safe conduct honored, one tribunal held on Frost Moon 19, one border court established in spring 1429, one 46-mile road traveled back and forth until distance became routine, rather than separation. Their fulfillment did not arrive as a single scene. It arrived as a structure they built and kept choosing. When people in court later asked Hadrian where the story truly began, she did not name the public claim, even though history books would. She named the gate on Frost Moon 12, 1428, when fear controlled the square, and a wounded stranger stood under lawful banner while everyone searched for a reason to deny him basic care. She had been unable, before that moment, to believe her actions in public could alter hierarchy instead of merely surviving it. Offering him shelter resolved that hesitation. Everything that followed became possible because she acted before she was certain she would be protected. And when they asked Zephyr, in quieter rooms, why he had risked royal cover on neutral ground, he answered with the same clipped honesty he had given her from the beginning. A king could manage borders through force for a season. He could only keep them through trust witnessed in law. Hadrian had shown him who held that trust at the frontier, and once he saw it, refusing her would have been a failure of both instinct and governance. He did not fail it. She did not either. Their life proved the point daily, in court records, in healed wounds, in a partnership chosen with full cost accounted and paid.